Okay, good evening and a warm welcome to everyone joining us for today's webinar. My name is Mel Romualdez and I am the Deputy Director of the Center for Research in Autism and Education. Here at CRAE, we are a team of autistic and non-autistic staff and students based at the UCL Institute of Education and part of the Department of Psychology and Human Development. We aim to conduct high-quality, cutting-edge research, but also to ensure that the results of this research reach those who stand to benefit from them. This CRAE webinar series is one part of that, allowing people both within and beyond academia to hear from some of the key researchers, practitioners, and advocates in the field. Through everything that we do at CRAE, we take a participatory approach, which means we work with autistic people in all stages of our research and initiatives, from conceptualization right through to the sharing of outcomes. We hope that this means that the work we do is meaningful for the wider autistic community. At this point, I'd like to say a big thank you to all our funders, supporters, and team members whose contributions are invaluable to our mission. In particular, a special thank you to the Pears Foundation for their generous ongoing support that makes our work at CRAE possible. As always, we invite you, the audience, to become part of the conversation, either in the chat or with more anonymity in the Q&A. We will endeavor to have as many questions answered as we can by our wonderful speaker, Barbara. Just a note, this Q&A will not be recorded. Today, we are thrilled to have the fantastic Dr. Barbara Sandland, who is Assistant Professor at the University of Birmingham and a higher education student mentor. As a neurodivergent individual and mother to neurodiverse children, she brings personal insight alongside critical research to her work. Barbara's background is as a qualified secondary school teacher with many years' experience as a special educational needs coordinator, which places her in the perfect position to reflect on reasonable adjustments. Barbara, over to you.
So this is always a little bit of the nervous bit where I go, I'm going to try and share my screen and see whether it works or not. So bear with me just a second, and I'm going to see if I can make this work. So let's go with that. So I'm going to assume you're now looking at the title screen for my PowerPoint presentation, and then somebody jumps up and waves at me trying to clear bonus. So I'm going to be talking today about reasonable adjustments, and I've been a little bit cheeky, and I've changed my title just slightly and incorporated a little bit of controversy. So I'm going to be on the edge of your seat, so that's coming at the end. So I'm going to be talking about reasonable adjustments, and are reasonable adjustments a life skill, tick box exercise, or are they part of the problem, which is the add-on little bit controversy? So just very briefly, I'm going to try and make my PowerPoint move. Let's go for that one. Right. So just to give you a bit of an overview of what I'm going to be talking about today. So I'm going to give you a really brief introduction to reasonable adjustments. Then I'm going to talk about them being a life skill. I'm going to talk about being tick box exercise. I'm going to talk a bit about are they part of the problem, and something at the end. Hopefully we'll have time for you to ask questions and me to attempt to try and answer them. Everything I'm talking about today is kind of based on some of my own experiences as a teacher, as a student, as an individual with autism. I say it like that, it's an autistic person and a dyslexic person. So this very brief introduction is the legal bit, and this is quite significant, and we'll link back to some of the things I'll talk about later on, because that's the first thing we talk about. Legal adjustments, reasonable adjustments are legal, and they are legal entitlements. But there's some really interesting wording in the legality around it. So it has to be a substantial negative effect. It has to be a long-term negative effect. So we have to really prove we deserve them in order to get them. And then there's this concept of reasonable. Who decides if it is reasonable or not? And who decides if it's not reasonable? And again, I'll come back to that a little bit later on. So this is your very brief introduction to reasonable adjustments. It is something that all disabled people are entitled to ensure fair access to a learning environment or a work environment or any kind of environment, really. It's supposed to level playing field. Right. Reasonable adjustments are reliant on some really, really key things. One, the person has to know they need help. They have to know that, in a nutshell, if we're talking about autism, they have to know they're autistic, which, let's face it, a lot of us spend a long time of our lives not knowing we're autistic. So I may have had lots and lots of experiences where I know I couldn't do something. Chances are I was going to assume that was my fault and something I was doing wrong because I didn't know I was autistic, and therefore I've got no context in order to explore that I needed help in that sense. The person has to know they can get help. So they have to know there are reasonable adjustments. There are these sorts of things that you can ask for. The person has to know or has to be willing to ask for help, which is a very different thing. Hate the word disclosure. I've put it on there because it's a technical term that people use. Hate the word disclosure because it suggests that there's something hidden and something we should be ashamed of. And it's not, and it shouldn't be. But asking for help requires sharing that part of your identity, and we'll come back to that a little bit later on. And really, very often with reasonable adjustments, it requires knowing what help you will need. And these are all really, really fundamental things that could become a barrier to getting reasonable adjustments. So I've put a couple of examples on there. Let's consider Sally. Sally was diagnosed as autistic at 3 years old. When she started school, it was identified that she needed additional support. At 6, Sally got an EHCP, which is pretty impressive in itself, let's face it. Throughout Sally's school life, Mum has attended annual reviews to discuss the provision Sally needs. When Sally got to high school, she was invited in to participate in them, which is practice. And she sat and she listened when the professionals told her the support that she would get. At 18, Sally left school and went to university. Sally now has to apply for reasonable adjustments. The uni has asked Sally what support she needs. Sally does not know what she needs. Why? And this is really interesting because you've got a case of a student that's been given support for a really long period of time. Yet when it comes to university and they say, okay, what do you need? Quite often they don't know. And there's, interestingly, actually, if I reflect back on my thesis work that I did around autistic identity, a lot of people are saying when they're diagnosed younger, it very much becomes something that was done for them, was done to them. And therefore, their awareness of their autism was lacking because they almost were separate from that activity. And in this sense, Sally has spent all her school years being given the support, but I wonder if anyone's actually spoke to her about why she gets that support, what that support is supposed to be helping. I know when I was at school, especially when access arrangements for exams and that sort of thing, the student would meet somebody, they would write a report saying, yes, they need extra time in their exams. That would be put in place, the student would turn up to the exam and there would be extra time. Where in the middle of that is someone going, you're getting extra time because if we're not telling them these things, how are we learning from it? And then the flip case study is you've got Hamid, who's just always struggled at school, regularly gets in trouble for his behaviour, support from CAMS for social anxiety, and he's going on to an apprenticeship. He's been told to ask for reasonable adjustments, and he doesn't. Why? Well, probably because he doesn't think he deserves them. No one's ever really, by the sound of it, told Amit what's going on. All the provision that you can see in this case study, in this scenario, is responsive. Something's gone wrong, somebody's responding to it. There doesn't seem to be much proactive stuff going on there of, okay, you struggle in a social environment which is causing this sort of reaction. So what if we talk about this sort of provision? What if we talk about this? Will that help? How does that work? And that sort of dialogue about what's going on and what could help in that sense. And this is where we're really lacking at the moment, of this dialogue of what autism means to the individual and how that's affecting them. I always reflect on the fact that I've got 2 autism diagnoses. I feel very special. One, because my first one was private, and my GP said, well, we're not accepting that. So then I had to wait for 3 years and go for an NHS diagnosis. My NHS diagnosis is a table of words and numbers. Now, I research autism, I live autism, I work with autism, you know, I eat, sleep, and breathe autism. I can't make any sense of that table. And if it's not making any sense to me, how is it making any sense to anyone else? And that was it. That's what you get with a diagnosis. Whichever format it comes in, very, very few people get anything after that. So who is helping the person understand what that means to them, where their strengths may be, where their challenges may be, and what support they may need to work with that? And if no one's addressing that, how are we expecting people to really functionally engage with reasonable adjustments? So this is sort of like it's a bit of a side claim, I guess, from the reasonable adjustment side of things. But it's really, really fundamental that we need some post-diagnostic interventions, some post-diagnostic support, where we're talking about these things and we're helping people understand themselves. Because until they understand these things, they can't be an active participant in any reasonable adjustment process. Now, the other side of this is we can't assume that because somebody knows they can get reasonable adjustments or knows that they should have reasonable adjustments, that they feel able to do it. One of the things that we talk quite a lot about with the participants in the study I was doing recently was about this idea about a cost-benefit analysis. And if the cost of asking for the reasonable adjustment outweighs the benefit, why would I ask for it in the first place? And it's something I don't think people that are providing the reasonable adjustments, I don't think they think about very often. All coloured boxes are quotes from the study. I'm not going to read those out to you, but they're all direct quotes from people that have had these experiences. So this is a really nice example, I think, of that cost-benefit analysis with a focus on interviews. And it's all these costs of, if I ask for a reasonable adjustment, how much effort is it going to take to arrange it? How many of my spoons am I going to have to use up? Will I be seen as hard work? Will it impact on my chances of getting the job? How much will I worry about? What they think about my requests? What if I ask for the wrong thing? What if they don't think it's reasonable? And what's the impact on my well-being of having to focus on the fact that I'm clearly not normal because I'm having to ask for all these things? And there's a lot of cost there that is significantly outweighing the possible benefit of I may cope with the interview better. And you can see there where there's that imbalance. Now we're going to come back to this example later. And this is significant, and it's something that, again, not enough thought is put into, but at times of crisis, when we need the help the most, we're least able to ask for it. Now, reasonable adjustment should be anticipatory. You cannot anticipate everything. It's physically impossible. If you try to anticipate everything, your reasonable adjustment plan is going to be incredibly long. So what do we do? What are we putting in place to manage the unpredictable? And if you're able to manage the unpredictable, do you need the wrap in the first place? I'll come back to that maybe afterwards. But I think this is really important. We can't plan for everything. So are reasonable adjustment plans a tick box exercise? And by tick box exercise, I mean, are they doing it because they have to? And this is the link to the legal side of things. This is a legal requirement, and therefore, are the implementation more about proving I'm doing what I legally should be doing, or is it more about helping the individual? Lots of probably questions here rather than telling you the answers. So when we reflect on schools or universities or employers, the question is, are they providing reasonable adjustments because they have to or because they want to? There's a cultural element there. And one of the main points to consider when we try and answer that question is how many quality assurance mechanisms are there for reasonable adjustment plans? We focus a lot on production of reasonable adjustments, getting that wrap in place, showing the provisions there. How many mechanisms are there to check how they're being implemented, if they're being implemented? Probably far fewer than there should be, I would say. And you can see there's some of the quotes of, it felt like a hope so situation. And I think that really nicely sums up reasonable adjustments quite often. They go down on a piece of paper, and then I kind of keep my fingers crossed that somebody might read that piece of paper or somebody might do it. And what impact does it have if they don't do it? And who's checking? One of the things I get really, really annoyed about when I apply for jobs or I apply to a disability service or I ask for reasonable adjustments, you should get a box to tick saying, which disability are you? I don't fit a box. I've got quite a few. And it becomes it becomes a barrier in itself, because actually I have to then prioritise which disability do I think is the most important. And then my reasonable adjustments will reflect whichever one I've prioritised on that given day. How do we approach reasonable adjustments with an appreciation that co-occurrence is incredibly common? Probably is more the norm than non-co-occurrence. How do we make people fit lots of boxes? And how many reasonable adjustment plans are approached on the basis of the label instead of the individual? So are we saying, oh, you're autistic, therefore you need this sort of support? And the quote there, I think I reflect quite, I relate to, because I've got the divide between physical disabilities and neurodivergence, and they always seem really separately. Yet with more and more literature now saying that connective tissue disabilities commonly co-occur with neurodivergence, yet they're completely separate support systems. So it's twice as much of the fight. It's twice as much of the spoons I've got to use up to get through these systems. Autism is not a static entity, and we far too often think it is. The autism that we have when we're born is not the same autism that we have when we die, because autism responds to our experiences, it responds to our language, it responds to our hormones if we're going through puberty, and probably menopause. There are so many different factors that affect autism over time. Then you've got the co-occurrence. Then you've got cultural implications and intersectionality. And there's so many things that affect our autism that there's just no point of seeing it addressing reasonable adjustments as a single thing. And this is really important when we talk about, I had a reasonable adjustment plan that was created at the beginning of my master's, and it was the same reasonable adjustment plan that I had when I finished my PhD. That's quite a significant chunk of time. I'm not the same person I was then that I am now. How do we approach that variability? How a reasonable adjustment process is a really static process. Tends to be once that provision's there, that's it, that's what you've got. How do we adapt to it? And the fact that I can have different, I can experience things differently on different days. How do we produce that sort of flexibility? And as a general rule, reasonable adjustment plans don't facilitate that level of flexibility. You may wonder why there's a picture of a fish on there. I will explain. So me and my son watch QI quite a lot. And one of the statements on QI was there's no such thing as a fish. It's a term that we use, but actually there are lots and lots of different types of fish and they have very little in common with each other. And one fish may have more in common with a giraffe than it does with a different type of fish. To which my son turned around to me and went, so autism's a fish then, Mummy? And I just thought, I love it. Just love it. We have quite philosophical conversations in our house. But I just thought it was brilliant because when we look at a fish, we see the title of a fish. We don't see the individuality and what makes that fish different. And there's a tendency with autism to do the same, I think. We talk about autism collectively. And sometimes that may cause a barrier to actually seeing the individuality of the creature below it. I like the analogy anyway. So here comes the controversy. This is your warning. Are reasonable adjustment plans, are reasonable adjustments part of a problem? Are they part of a wider problem? And I'm going to pick out some of the things of why I think they may be part of a bigger problem. And one of the first things that came out of the research that I was doing and the conversations I've been having is this concept of power dynamics. Reasonable adjustments work on the basis that, like we identified at the beginning, the individual will know they need help and they will ask for help. The person providing the reasonable adjustments will decide whether they will do it or not. So they have the opportunity to say no. So the autistic person may know what they want to do, want to succeed, be willing to work at succeeding, and really have the potential to succeed at what they want to do. But they ultimately may not have the power to make that happen. That power is held by somebody else who can decide whether or not to provide the support they need. So there's an embedded issue here of power, and the autistic person is in the inferior position in quite a lot of places. And they also work on the basis that there is a normal way of doing things, and we will do something to help you who can't do it. Reinforcing that message that you can't do it the way everybody else does it, therefore we've got to do something special for you. Real, and it's put in such a lovely way, and it's meant with such kindness. But there's some fundamental questions here that we need to be asking ourselves about the structure and the approach that we're using. There's also the link here to the double empathy problem, and the reasonable adjustment plans is all on the individual to go, I need help, I want this, can you do it for me? And the employer or the school staff or somebody to go, okay, I'll do this. Oh, it's hard work, but I'll do it. I'll make the adjustments. Where's the other perspective? Actually, what's going wrong here? Who's challenging this side of things? Why is it always the autistic person that's at fault? I've got some really good way of doing things. I've got some very different way of doing things. I can do them really well. How about you start doing it the way I do it? And this really feeds into the idea of universal design. How do we approach things so we don't have to make the accommodations or adjustments? One of the things we've been doing in the project that we've been looking at is really flipping it on its head, and it's been really fascinating to do, actually. And I recommend everybody considers doing this. Look at your reasonable adjustments that you've got. If you've got 5 reasonable adjustment plans or accessibility plans, or you've got hundreds, depending on the institution, have a look at them and look at the frequency that the same things are being written down. So I was doing analysis of reasonable adjustment plans for doctoral students. So we were looking specifically at the Viva and what reasonable adjustments were needed in the Viva. And every single reasonable adjustment plan said, give the student extra time to think about the answer. And we kind of looked at it and went, the Viva's not a time restricted activity. There is no requirement on anybody to do things quickly. So why does that need to be a reasonable adjustment? Why can't we just say to all students, take your time, there is no rush, we will wait. Then we don't need a reasonable adjustment plan for it. And it's really, really interesting to flip it on its head and look at it backwards, look at your reasonable adjustment plans and go, right, okay, what can we pick out of these and go, let's do this universally. Let's do this for everybody. Whenever I meet with a student, I always send an email at the end of it going, this is what we've discussed and this is what our action points are. And do you know what? It helps me, because it helps me remember what I've got to do. It helps the student remember what we've discussed. It gives us a record of the meeting. It doesn't matter whether the student's neurodiverse or not. It's a good strategy to use. And if we can incorporate these strategies into our everyday, then would we need to adjust? And actually, would it make life easier for everybody? So I'm going to reflect now back on the interview example I gave at the beginning about this cost-benefit analysis. Imagine a conversation building up to the interview where the interviewer leads on the conversation prior to the interview and says, I want to talk about how we're going to arrange the interview. I'm going to tell you how we often do it. I'm going to tell you the type of things we've done before to help other people that may need us to approach this differently. I'm going to give you some examples. And then as a follow-on to that, the autistic person then goes, great, I've processed what you've said. I'm going to tell you now if there's anything else that I need. Now, straight away, it hasn't taken a lot of effort. The employer has facilitated that conversation. It's made it a natural part of the process. It's not extra work. I'm not using loads of spoons. I can cross it off. Will I be seen as hard work? No. because the employer has demonstrated to me that this is normal for them. This is what they do normally. So therefore, I'm not being hard work because that's what normally happens. Will it impact my chances of getting a job? No, because he's proven to me that other people have worked there that have asked for the same sort of thing. So I don't need to worry about that. How much will I worry about what they think about my requests? Probably less, because I've got some examples of the type of things they've done. I've got something to work off, so I know how they're going to feel about it. What if I ask for the wrong thing? I've left that on there because I always worry about that. I don't think it doesn't matter what anyone does, I'll always worry about that. What if they don't think it's reasonable? Well, again, I've got examples of what they're deeming reasonable, so I've got something to work from. And what's the impact of my well-being? Well, actually, they're telling me making adjustments is normal. So I'm not normal anymore. And you can see straight away, a very, very simple conversation has balanced that out. And we've now got a much healthier situation. This graduated response triangle was something that came out some of the research we were doing, and it really focused this idea of the more we can take reasonable adjustment plans and identify universal design principles, the less we will need reasonable adjustment plans, and the more inclusive and positive environment we are going to be working in. And really importantly, the less work it will involve for everybody, because the more we do this naturally, the less extra reasonable adjustment plans we're creating, and the less extra thinking of, well, if I normally do it that way, then I've got to do it that way for that student, and that way for that student, that way for that student. It does actually reduce workload. It also covers all the people, if we think right the way back to the beginning, all the people that don't know they're autistic, so can't ask for help. All the people that don't want to talk about their autism, don't want to share that, they're still getting support. It also covers all your other neurodivergent people, all your students or people with English as additional language, anyone struggling with mental health problems, some physical, medical, and anyone just having a really bad day. Being inclusive naturally, universally, gets rid of that extra need to accommodate, to do the extra stuff. So what do we need to do? I'm quite impressed I'm doing all right for time here, actually. I don't know how quick I've been talking, but so ultimately, we need less reasonable adjustment plans. And this is where I say I am being controversial. So we need the post-diagnostic support. We need support for autistic people to know what their autism means to them, and that it's individual to them. And we need to develop those skills and facilitate that awareness of, I'm good at this, I can do this I find more difficult, I could do with help for that. And that normality, that is how we all function. We all have strengths at things, we all have weaknesses at things, whether you're autistic or not, ADHD or not, dyslexic or not, that is human nature. Normalizing that approach. We need to have more inclusive, universal designs where we are facilitating these as much as possible to really reduce the amount of reasonable adjustments that we need. So we're facilitating people asking for them, but then we're putting them in an environment where things that thinking I might need, I can see are already being done here, but there's that one thing that isn't. So let's focus on that. So it becomes more personalized, more targeted, more effective, rather than just mass reports that become, especially in big institutions, if you read a lot of them, you become a little bit blind to them. we need a two-way approach, that it's a joint problem and a joint solution. It's not, I'm going to do something to fix your problem. It's, we've both got a problem because it's not working. Let's work together and find a solution. It's a joint system that involves a two-way dialogue. We need some flexibility to facilitate changes and differences and good days and bad days and conferences and trips and transitions and homeworking and office working and all the different things we have to do nowadays. And when we do have reasonable adjustments, somebody needs to be checking, are they working? Are they actually happening? Because I think that's really something that a lot of people are missing, that quality control element of, is it working? Because if we're not checking that, it's just a tick box exercise. It's just a piece of paper to cover ourselves to say we've done it. Unless we're really checking whether that's happening, there's no point having them in the first place. And that's me. According to my clock, I've finished like with 1 minute to spare, which I think, considering all the stress, is pretty impressive.
Absolute star. You really, you nailed that one. In fact, just a comment from the chat. At one point, all the points you were making were, and I quote, bang on. Isn't that lovely? And can I say to everybody in the chat, they've just done a lovely job. Sometimes people have been asking questions, and then other people have been looking up things for you and sticking it in for them.
Oh, thank you.
A lovely community that cares for each other, and I'm very proud of you all. You are lovely. Saying that, I've got a couple of questions that I pulled out, but before I do, I would love just to say my thanks to you, Barbara. You started off with talking about the sort of shared experience, and the chat suddenly became alive with these experiences that they've had of reasonable adjustments just not cutting. You then talk about disclosure, and the chat became alive with the perils of disclosure and perhaps where it can and cannot. You talked about the need for understanding, and again the chat becomes alive, and this understanding then allows people to become active participants. You talked about risk and vulnerability of this project process, and potentially the dismissal that goes along with that. You then moved on and you talked about anticipatory needs for well-being. I mean, that's just amazing. You don't want to do stuff when you're in crisis. You want it there for, hopefully, so you don't get in crisis in the first place. You talked about boxes as barriers. You talked, power of marginalization. Amazing stuff. And from that, you brought it together to this lovely concept of universal design. And the fact that universal design, when done, is good for everyone. It's good for the designers as well as the designeed. Not sure that's there we go. And then you came back to the reasonable adjustments, the post-diagnostic support, and things being personalized and targeted and flexible. I mean, quality, not just a tick box. Barbara, that was amazing. I'm going to now start to gather together a lot of the questions. If you have a direct question, you can drop it in the question and answers. Before I come to the question and answers, and I'm aware we've only got 15 minutes before we wrap up, I've got a few questions that just popped up in the chat for you as we go. Could you explain the double empathy problem and how it links to reasonable adjustments? Okay, big question. Yeah.
Big question.
Yeah. So
I'm going to try me.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. So, idea of double empathy problem is autism has traditionally been positioned that there is something wrong with the autistic person. There is something wrong with the way they do something, and therefore they need help. So let's give an example of social communication. Autistic people aren't very good at social communication, therefore let's help them talk to people. Okay, so the double empathy problem would say autistic people have a communication style. which is different to a non-autistic person's communication style. The judgment that one is inferior and one is superior is unfair. You wouldn't talk to a Spanish person who is talking fluent Spanish and you're talking English and judge their communication as inferior. It's just different. So that's kind of the basis. So what I'm kind of thinking is quite often we build reasonable adjustments around the person's inability to do something the way the neurotypical or non-autistic person does it. So if a child in a classroom can't sit still for an hour at a time, we may build reasonable adjustments around movement, because we are judging their inability to sit still as a deficit. Actually, if we just see it as a different movement style and allow the child to move, it just becomes a different approach in the classroom rather than something that we need to target a reasonable adjustment for. Does that make sense?
That makes brilliant sense. And I think, just to take it even further, that the power imbalance of a majority with one form of communication versus a minority with a different form of communication is actually where a lot of that stuff collides really horribly. Also, if there are teachers, I used to be a teacher myself, as did Barbara, if you need to model wiggling from the front, do so. It rocks. Yeah. Next question. Oh, one that popped up in the class and reasonable adjustments. Is reasonable adjustments particularly going on in schools? Is it more of a middle class thing? Or, and one of the conversations was, how do you make reasonable adjustments when you're working the tilde, when you have those different class jobs, rather than it being sort of nice thing in nice schools? I think we went on to talk about that with universal design, but a minute or so on class and reasonable adjustments.
So I lost a few words in that question. So we're talking about social class, not classroom.
Not classroom class, social class. That's why they are brilliant in the textbooks. They are just chatting about everything. It's amazing. Thank you.
So does social class impact reasonable adjustments? It definitely shouldn't.
No, I think it does, but it shouldn't.
It's one of those things, isn't it, that I'm a big proponent of. If you haven't experienced it, you can't judge it. And I've probably got an element of privilege. Well, everyone has some privileges. I'm a white middle class person. I don't know is my honest answer, and I'm not going to try and fob it off. I don't know.
What makes you bloody brilliant. Excuse my language. I do love your approach to this stuff. Moving on, question-wise, I've got one more from the chat until I have to scroll through it again, which is, do you know of anything that is being done to educate employers about either universal design for employment or reasonable adjustments in employment? Do you know anything? If not, please do chime in along the chat, because I'm sure someone will.
There is nowhere near enough being done. Universal design is a relatively new-ish concept in the sense of terminology. And I think there's so much to think about. The reasonable adjustment process and the way it fits within a medicalized approach fits with how wider society wants to see disability. So there's so much intertwined with it all. It's not just about challenging a system, it's about challenging a thought process and the way we even start to talk about disability or different abilities. There are books, especially for education, on universal design. Education are ahead of employment. But no, the more I talk about reasonable adjustments, the more I'm getting sort of hooked on going, no one's talking about this enough. So I think it's something that people are starting to sort of want more on, but I don't think there's anywhere near enough out there.
From the chat, just if anyone's looking out there, the Access to Work scheme, the ATW scheme, employment autism has popped up as one of the things, and I'll come back to questions in the chat in a second. Before I go to the Q&A, very aware we've got 7 minutes, all right, and the questions are just keeping on coming because you have opened up an amazing topic of conversation here, Barbara. Let's go for, we have in the questions and answers, a learning support system in a secondary school. Kids who are young or newly diagnosed, how do we help them to learn self-advocacy for adjustments when they either don't know what's possible or what they might need, or if they are in denial or upset or angry about having a diagnosis? How do you follow through those things? Have you got, what would be your top suggestion in such a scenario?
My top suggestion, I appreciate where you're coming from. I've been in that situation. So I understand there's a lot of things actually in there that one solution is not going to solve all of them. But the best thing I ever did was start it was classed as a social skills group back in the day when those were the things that we were forced to introduce. But we became a community. So my autistic children across the secondary school, we start having lunch together. And we would start I would facilitate conversations initially. And very, very quickly, you got conversations between like the younger year 7s, maybe with the year 11s, and the year 7 would come in having a right huff going, oh, I've just had Mr. So-and-so and he's done this, that sort of thing. And the year 11 went, yeah, did you do X, Y, Z? And the year 7 would go, yeah. And you go, oh, yeah, you don't do that. Don't do that. So the peer learning that started going on was amazing. And actually, it became incidental of somebody would say, I just can't keep up in my exam. And somebody else would go, I get extra time in my exam. Does that match? And we'd start having a conversation about it. And it just grew and grew and grew. So this group, we started doing peer training. So they started going out and they did assemblies and they trained each other's form groups about autism and awareness. We had our MP in and we met with our MP to talk about it. And then we expanded out and we started going bowling and parents got involved. So then the parents built a community around it. And eventually I stepped back and they got on with it and they didn't need me anymore. But that interaction, they had such an impact.
If I could clone you, I would. I would clone you and I'd send you into schools everywhere. That's just beautiful. It really is. And there is something about community and solidarity which just is transformative.
Too many of our autistic kids think they're on their own and we need to show them they're not. We're out there. We exist.
Yeah, exactly. I have time for maybe 2 more questions, and I do apologise to those I won't get around to. I've got one from outside of teaching, from a designer. How is it possible to design a space that is for everyone? It's so difficult to generalize neurodivergent people's needs and designs. From your experience, any advice on how you can create a space that works for everyone? Universal design, back in the architecture space, which is where it actually came from in the first place.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
It's a really, really tricky one. And it's one that I get a little bit touchy about when people start talking about start advocating of, well, I need lower lights and well, I need higher lights and that. And it's really, you're never going to please everybody in life. It's not physically possible. But I think the issue is about having flexibility, having lights that may be dimmer at the back of the room and lighter at the front of the room, having different chairs in different parts of the room. So it's just providing alternatives. Obviously, the bigger the space, the more flexibility you've got. The smaller the space, the more difficult it gets. But adaptability, having headphones so people can put headphones if it's too loud, having a radiator that turns off every now and again, or do you know what I mean? It's flexibility is the key. You're never going to create one static environment that pleases everybody. So it's about building in some sort of flexibility wherever possible.
One of the things they talk about in universal design for learning is multiplicities. Maybe it's not about having one space, but a couple of spaces and spaces within inside the spaces. Was that unnecessarily weird?
There was lots of spaces in that sentence.
Lots of spaces in that sentence. I think this we've got 2 minutes left, and this will be our last question. So I'm truly sorry, but I think it's a great one. Do you have any advice for autistic folks asking for reasonable adjustments for the first time? Their first time they talk about it. You talked about your own how I asked for the wrong thing. Well, have you ever asked the adjustment, can we have lots of meetings about the adjustment in case the first one was wrong? Oh.
I did have someone tell me that they felt like they needed a reasonable adjustment plan to manage the reasonable adjustment plan process. Yes. Asking for the first time is incredibly scary, and is a very vulnerable position to be in as the autistic person. So I think if you're feeling that way, it's about picking the right person. Put your feelers out a little bit and find the person that you trust. It might not be the person that deals with reasonable adjustments. It might not be anybody to do with that part of the school or the employment, but find somebody that you trust will hear you and listen to what you're saying, and get them to, they will then support you. It might be that they will then contact the other people on your behalf. It may be they'll come with you. It may be they'll talk you through the process. But I think it's more important to find the right person than it is to find the right job role.
Barbara, I'm just so glad that we managed to end with this whole idea of, well, we first of all talk about community, and then we talk about trust. These are the things that we can build a good future on. I want to thank you on behalf of Cray. I want to thank everybody in the chat and everyone who's been along today. You've all been brilliant. Barbara, you've been doubly brilliant. Thank you ever so much. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.